Thank you for tuning in once again to Gods, Demons, and Magic. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. So for some time now, we've been discussing the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus, and in particular that section where Porphyry, the Neoplatonist philosopher, is asking questions of Anebo, the Egyptian priest. He begins to ask about the iconography of the Egyptian system of worship. He asks, what do they mean when they speak of one coming forth to light from the slime, sitting on the lotus blossom, sailing in a boat, changing forms according to the season, and assuming a shape according to the signs of the zodiac? So here he's asking about the various images of Horus, of the sun god, that one may find in the Egyptian religion. You can imagine for a Greek, particularly, say, one visiting or living in Alexandria, you would see all these amazing and mysterious forms of deities being worshipped in Egyptian temples and being brought out in procession, and all the various symbols you may find in the hieroglyphics. So he's curious, what is all of this? Today I want to talk a bit about the divine imagery used by the ancient Egyptians. They considered the universe to be a cosmic egg, and just as you can take an egg at the store and shake it, you can see that it's half filled with liquid. So in the same way, the universe was considered filled with the primeval waters, sort of the waters of the potential of creation, in which everything exists in a chaotic, mixed state. And then from these waters, there arises a primeval mound. And some creation stories explain that a lotus flower, a divine lotus flower, rose up from this mound and grew upward, and then as it opened, the god Horus appeared within the midst of it. And Horus, of course, is the sun god, so he's shining brilliantly as the sun does. And it is then from this demiurge, or this god of creation, that the whole universe expands, or is ordered. And the lotus was a very prominent symbol within the ancient Egyptian culture. In fact, we have our own sort of ideas of pyramids and sphinxes and all these different things associated with Egyptian culture, but they really like to decorate themselves with lotuses, particularly the blue lotus of the Nile. It's all over their temples, all over their residences. It's there within the depictions of the gods. And so they very much centered their culture in many ways on the symbol of the lotus. And the lotus is a symbol of rebirth and regeneration. It arises from the waters of a pond or the river, and it opens and closes its petals continually with the rising and setting of the sun. And so you see there's this idea of the constant regeneration of life, especially in the presence of the sun, and also the continual cycle of creation and destruction of the universe itself. And the sun god Horus was strongly connected with the lotus. He would always be depicted sitting on a lotus. Oftentimes he would be depicted as a child, because the newborn rising sun, which is Horus, was seen as, a youth, or even a young child of 4 or 5 years old. In fact, many of the depictions have him sitting on a lotus, which is opened, and he's sitting there as a child, and his finger is on his mouth. And it's meant to be just like you'll find little kids sometimes, they like to put their finger on their lip, or they like to put their thumb in their mouth. That's more of like a modern way of seeing a child. But, this actually led to some confusion, because many of the Greeks would see these depictions of Horus with a finger in his mouth, and they thought he was making the shh sign, to keep a secret, and therefore they thought he was the god of secrets. But really it's sort of like a cute way in which a child will behave, and he's seen as like a cute young boy, playing on this lotus which is just opened. You can see similar imagery is still found in India. In fact, India is an amazing place. It's many of the culture of ancient Egypt, as well as the ancient Mediterranean in general, the Roman and Greek world, you could still find today living and existing in India. It's kind of like if you travel to India and visit there, it's in many places of India, it's like you're traveling back in time. And in India, the deity of Krishna is still worshipped as a small baby, a small child, very similar to the imagery of Horus in ancient Egypt. You'll see that Krishna will be depicted in a style where he's like a fat young, little baby, laying on his back, sucking his thumb or sucking his toes. Or there's another depiction of Krishna as Bal Krishna, where he's crawling on all fours, and he's holding in one hand a sweet, like a milk sweet, And oftentimes in the literal depictions of Krishna, he'll be running along, and he'll have tied around his waist like a little string, and there's a bell on the string that shakes when he runs, which is a way that parents sort of keep track of their children, right? So there's all these he's really depicted and worshipped as a small child, and his activities are considered very cute and even very naughty. Like he'll do things that are considered bad, just as children do, like breaking their toys and things like that, or stealing what we would consider food out of the refrigerator, breaking yogurt pots, and licking the yogurt off of his fingers. So in this way, there's this imagery surrounding Krishna as a small child. And so this, if you want to see sort of in a deeper sense the imagery of Horus as a child and what it must have meant for the residents of ancient Egypt and how they worshipped him or appreciated him as a child, you can look in India towards the depictions of Krishna and understand that it wasn't just, a picture of a deity carved on a temple wall, but it was an entire system of devotion and a sort of appreciation of the god in this very cute and lovable form. And so the Egyptians envisioned this sort of lotus of creation rising up from the waters, and the bud of the lotus opening, and there being this shining, brilliant child. And this child is, basically sucking his thumb, or he's got his finger on his lip. And he's very cute and very sweet and innocent, and, he's a young boy. But he's so brilliant that when he opens his eyes, he illuminates the entire universe. And whereas in many cultures, such as that of India or in Central Asia and in Europe with the Greeks and Romans, the sun was considered to traverse the sky, being dragged by a chariot. In Egypt, he was considered to be sailing in a boat or in a bark. And as Porphyry's asking here, he changes his form according to the seasons. So it's very common that you'll see the sun god will be depicted in 12 different manifestations, each of them associated with, as he's traveling through a particular sign of the zodiac. And it's almost like he's in a certain mood, or he's colored by the qualities of that zodiac, or the other way around. The zodiac is sort of a manifestation of the sun as he moves through the ecliptic, and he's in a certain mood in expressing certain qualities, and then those manifest the qualities associated with that zodiac sign. Now there's another very interesting correlation between Egypt and India that I would like to share. It's that of the Egyptian god Ptah, who's considered the demiurge or the sub-creator. You have the transcendental supreme god, who's beyond matter, and he's the ultimate source of all creation. Oftentimes this is, depicted as Amun. And then you have the sub-creator, the demiurge, who's actually born into this world. He doesn't create the elements of the world, but he takes those elements and then orders them. He's an engineer. He's a sculptor. He takes ingredients that already exist, such as the earth, and he sculpts them into something. So the idea that the demiurge has ordered the world from the ingredients created by the one transcendent God is there within the ancient Egyptian religion. And this demiurge was known as Ptah. In fact, the name Egypt, coming from the Greek, Aegyptos, it ultimately goes back to the name of Ptah. And Ptah is a fascinating character. It's actually, he's depicted as, first of all, having within himself these thoughts, these images, these sort of ideas of what the creation should be. And then from those thoughts, they gradually rise up and come out of his mouth as audible speech. And when they come out of his mouth as audible speech, they actually turn into the very substance of creation, and physical objects are created. So they originate within him as a certain idea or thought, and then come out as sort of the creative power of speech itself. And the entire material existence is really nothing but the speech of Ptah. Just as you're taking the sound vibration or the capacity for vibration and ordering it with your lips and your tongue and your mouth and your jaw and turning it into speech, so similarly he's taken the substance of creation and ordered it into the universe. And from what I've heard, is that this is one of the reasons the Egyptians used images rather than a traditional alphabet like the Phoenicians and Greeks. Rather, they used hieroglyphics, at least for their sacred language. And it's really taking speech and depicting it as an image, a form, in the same way that Ptah, his speech, becomes the very form of reality. So in a sense, the universe itself is a hieroglyph based upon the speech of Ptah. Now this has very strong corollaries, incredible actually, corollaries with the demiurge in Indian or Hindu Vedic thought, which is Brahma. And just as Horus is seen as arising sitting atop this cosmic lotus flower which has arisen from the waters of creation, so similarly Brahma, he's depicted as also sitting atop a lotus flower which is arising from the primordial waters of creation, known as the Garbhodaka ocean, the waters of birth. And before the creation of the universe, he awakens to find himself sitting atop this lotus flower, and he's thinking, what is this? Who am I? What's going on here? And he's surrounded by darkness on all sides, and he climbs down the stem of the lotus. He makes his way down into the waters of creation themselves, and he's not able to find the source. And then, of course, the Vedas, the Puranas, they describe that the source is the stem, ultimately goes into the body of Garbhodaka Vishnu, which is a certain manifestation of the supreme, eternal, one, transcendent God, similar to Amun. But Brahma is not able to find the source of his creation, or the root of the lotus. And so he climbs back up to the top of the lotus and begins to sit in meditation. And there he hears a divine voice, which is ultimately the voice of the transcendent God, saying tapa, which means austerity in Sanskrit. He's giving him an instruction or an order. And so Brahma begins to perform intense austerity and deep meditation. And he does this for an incredibly long time, until finally the Supreme Lord, or the transcendent God, is pleased with him and actually blesses him with a divine vision of the transcendent realm. And in fact, there's an ancient text called the Brahma Samhita within the Vedic literatures, where Brahma is offering prayers to the Supreme Lord and then expressing or describing what this transcendental realm looks like. And it's a very esoteric scripture. And so after having this divine vision, and while being seated on the lotus flower, then the Vedic literatures describe that then the Supreme One Transcendent God, or Vishnu, actually invests him with the divine power of creation. The Vedic literatures go into great detail about how this happens. This power of creation, it becomes mixed with vibration or sound, and it enters into the lowest chakra of Brahma as he's sitting there in meditation. And I'm sure the listeners are familiar with the chakra system. It enters into his Muladhara chakra, or the root chakra, and there it's considered what's called Paravak, or the highest division of speech. It's transcendental vibration. And then that vibration enters upward into his Manipur chakra, which is the chakra sort of in the upper part of one's abdomen or belly. And it becomes Pashantivak, which is sort of the vibration in the forms or the various visualized ideas of creation itself. It's kind of like that transcendental vibration. Then it turns into the ideals or the forms of creation as an idea, a visualization, and a sort of mental image of what creation can be. And then as this vibration moves upward into the Vishuddha chakra, or the throat chakra of Brahma, and there it becomes something known as Madhyamavak, or its vibration on the mental platform. It began as a kind of transcendental sound, and then moved upward into an intellectual sound, sort of a very subtle conceptualization of the forms which will be created. And now, as it enters the throat chakra, it becomes a very clear mental idea of what Brahma wants to create. It becomes a logic and reason and structure become applied, and he has a very clear understanding of what he wants creation to be and how he wants to order it. And then it comes out of his mouth, and that is known as Vaikadivak, or gross physical speech, the sound vibration of the world that we're familiar with. And within Vaikadivak, it's really the power of creation. It's the power of organizing and structuring matter. And so you'll see that the Vedas offer this very complex idea of how the demiurge, seated upon his lotus flower, takes the various thoughts, just as we see Pita. He takes this kind of subtle element of thought and conceptualization and then turns it into physical reality as it exits his mouth as sound vibration. So similarly, the Vedas describe that Brahma, inspired or empowered by the Supreme God, finds within himself all the potential of creation, rising upward through his chakras and becoming more and more clear as a vision and as a plan, and then exiting his mouth as the vibration which orders creation. And we ourselves, as small individuals, are a microcosm of this whole process. We are individual creators in the sense that we move about the world and we try to order the world and create it and adjust it for our own happiness and pleasure. And it follows a very similar process that Brahma goes through. In a sense, there's the most subtle level of vibration, which is the vibration of the soul. The soul is completely spiritual, and yet the soul is vibrating with desire. It can either be a spiritual desire, which is to live in harmony with the Supreme Lord, in service and with genuine love, spiritual love, or it could be a material desire, which is the desire to enjoy the world, to enter into the world and become a kind of a god ourselves, in the sense that we want to dominate and control and exploit matter, and to be a lord and master of everything we survey. And so this vibration, this material vibration, as it moves upwards through the chakra system, it coalesces, it becomes more and more material. It enters into the Manipura chakra within the abdomen. It becomes Pashantibhak. It becomes a kind of visualization, a disorganized, swirling cacophony of images and forms, and it's gradually coalescing into a certain plan or idea of how we're going to enjoy the world. And then as it moves upwards into Vishuddha chakra, or the throat chakra, then it becomes an actual intellectual endeavor. It becomes a certain idea. It enters into our mind as a certain desire. And we think about that desire, and we develop a plan of how we're going to fulfill it. And then finally, once we have a very clear idea of what we want to do, then it exits the mouth as Vaikadivak, or the vibration of creation, as actual physical speech. And take, for example, you have a man who, he's a real estate investor or something like that in New York City, in Manhattan, and he wants to build a skyscraper. So, you have the kind of the subtle vibration of desiring to enjoy the world coming from the soul platform. And then that enters into the platform of the intellect as a sort of like a cloud of ideas or thought forms. And then it begins to take form in his mind as the desire and the plan to make a skyscraper. And he's actually going to build this gigantic building. And he begins to think about it and make plans and take steps and everything like that. And he's went to college. He went to the university and he's got his business degree. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's qualified. He's done this before. And he has a very structured conception of how he's going to actually go about creating this skyscraper. And his ultimate goal is to make a lot of money, and to buy a house in the Hamptons or whatever it may be. But he's now turning this into an actual plan. And then once he has it fixed in his mind of what he's going to create, then he begins speaking about it. In fact, if you look in any office, you'll usually find, all the cubicles and stuff like that. But sometimes the nicest, largest rooms are the conference rooms, right? It's where all the managers come and sit together and around a table and basically speak. And speaking is our primary tool for manipulating the world and changing it. Once you actually start speaking about it, then everyone sort of gets involved and applies their creative energy. It gradually manifests into action steps. And the project begins to take off. It begins to take physical form. and that will manifest all the way down to the level of the engineers and the builders, and even the job manager, at the site, actually instructing the construction workers what to do, right? Or the architect himself who designs the building. That's a kind of speech, it's laid out in a very visual form as an architectural plan, and yet it's also speech. So speaking is the way that we actually control and shape matter. And this is because we mimic the structure of the universe that we're actually situated within. We are, in a sense, small creators, just as the demiurge is a creator. And so thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope that you'll join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.